Today we're installing a valve body kit for the 6R80 transmission that's found in the Ford Ranger and Everest, and also the Mazda BT50. Let's get into it. Before we start the job, we road test the vehicle, make sure it's clear of any fault codes, and then safely put it on the hoist or jack stands. All right, first step is to remove the harness from the transmission itself and fold that out of the way, like so. Next step is to remove the transmission pan. I just loosened off these bolts here just to give more access to the transmission bolts. Just like so. And then we start removing the bolts. On this particular transmission, there is no actual drain plug, so I tend to loosen the bolts off a little bit, leave the back bolts tight at this point, and start to slowly drain off the oil out of the transmission. Ford decided on this model it's a fill for life transmission. This model does get messy. Now we leave the last bolts at the back of the transmission. You can leave just one, or right now I've done two, and we can drain the oil just from the front of the transmission. When I get enough room, I can actually wiggle the filter out. If we leave the filter in, because the filter gets held up by the pan, if we leave the filter half in the transmission right now, it has a chance of splashing and then you get covered in oil. So right now the filter's dropped out of the transmission and it's just sitting in the pan right now. At this point, I hold up the pan level and take out the last bolt, like so, and then slowly drop down the filter so I can drain the rest of the oil out of the pan. Now this particular vehicle has done quite a few kilometres and you can see the oil is very black. These pan gaskets, they are reusable, but we do not take that chance. Every time we take off the pan, we always replace these gaskets. The next part that I do is I generally take the magnet off. Some of these models will have two magnets, others will just have one. At this point we make sure that our filters are correct. Remember to check the O-ring is on the filter and not stuck in the transmission. Next step is to release this white clip which holds the black sleeve, and you do that by just flexing the release clip and pulling down. The white clip that we pulled down before releases this black sleeve that will slide out the back of the transmission. It has got quite a few O-rings on it, so it can be a little bit of a bugger. Just like so. Next step, we will remove the 11 bolts using the T30 Torx bit. All the bolts that have to come out are all T30. All the ones that are in there, they're holding the valve body together. And there is 3 shorter bolts at the back of the valve body that we have to remove as well. Same as the pan, I'll leave 1 bolt slightly loose until I'm ready to take the valve body out. And then you can easily drop the valve body out. All right, this step we will remove the lead frame from the valve body assembly. That's held in by 6 bolts, and these are a T27. Now that those 6 bolts are removed, we can slide the lead frame off the valve body. It's actually guided on two locating guides, one at each corner. You'll have to wiggle the lead frame off the solenoids as well. It can be a little bit tedious. And there's the 2 guides just there. Some models will actually have a foam piece here, and then some models don't. Next part, we've got to take the solenoid retainer off. At this point, we'll set the replacement valve body next to the original, and we'll swap the solenoids 1 for 1. And just pop out like so. I'll give them a bit of a wipe down before I reinstall, and make sure you don't mix these ones up, as they're calibrated to the transmission ECU. We can set the original valve body aside. At this point, we can use the retaining plate as just to line up the solenoids. We'll just slide the retainer into position. Right, all these bolts are finger tight now, and we'll grab the torque wrench. We torque these bolts down to 53 inch-pounds. which also is 6 Newton meters. We do have to line this point, and that locates in that slot there. Then we start the guide pins. When it gets close, make sure that the range switch is in the slot, like so. Give it a little bit of a wiggle, and then we can push it the rest of the way. And we can reinstall the lead frame bolts. Now we just get these bolts touching, so then we can torque them down to the correct specs. And these 6 bolts are tightened down to 6 Newton meters or 53 inch-pounds. I like to go over it just to make sure that they are all done. And then we're ready to refit it to the transmission. Next step, we're going to make sure the tubes are still in the transmission and make sure that the seal block is still intact. Then we'll take the valve body back over to the vehicle. We'll replace the original thermostat with our cooler valve. Sometimes this valve won't stay in the hole and you may need a little bit of Vaseline. The Vaseline will melt, so it's fine to use a bit of Vaseline. Next part, we reinstall the valve body. Get one bolt ready, and I tend to put one bolt in the middle of the valve body. Before we secure the valve body to the transmission, we're going to make sure our manual valve is lined up with the shift lever. And then once that's lined up, you can chuck a bolt in. Now we want to get all these bolts started before we tighten them. Now, I'll start in the middle, and we tighten these all to 71 inch-pounds or 8 Newton meters. Once they're all done, I'll go back over them again just to make sure. Once the valve body is all torqued to the transmission, we replace these case connector sleeves. They have a tendency to leak, so we don't take any chances. We just fit a new one, which is supplied in the kit. We got to line up that keyway, and we will just set it in there and just wiggle it around. It will only go in one point, just like so. Once it's at that point, you can push it in. This can be a little bit firm to push in, but once it's in, you should be able to press the white clip up. The white clip shouldn't require any force. The white clip is up now. Next step is to refit the harness back into the transmission. And it should just click in just like that. Before we refit the new filter and pan, we will wipe down all the surfaces. All right, we've cleaned down the pan and then we fit the new gasket. And we fit the new filter. Give it a bit of a wiggle. It should just sit there. If it doesn't, you'll have to do a bit of a two-hand action with the pan. On this model, the pan actually holds the filter in the place. I'm going to start all the bolts before we tighten them. Once they're all started, we'll get them firm and then we'll go over it with a torque wrench. Now we've just got to tighten all the pan bolts to 11 Newton meters or 100 inch-pounds. Now that they're all torqued down, I'll just do one full lap of the pan to make sure that they're all torqued to spec and I didn't miss any. Now that's all torqued up. We're just going to make sure we retighten the bolts for the shifter cable bracket once the transmission pan is reinstalled. All right, the last step is to remove the filler plug and refill the transmission of oil. Once we've got a bit of oil in it, we will start the engine to run the transmission and then fill it up even more. All right, we've got to remove the filler plug using a 19mm spanner. Underneath the filler plug, there's actually a little dipstick. Fill the hose in. All right, before we start the engine, we fill the transmission up with some oil. It will take roughly around 5 to 6 litres before it will start spewing out, and then we can start it and then top it up a little bit more. Just removing the hose to lower the vehicle down so we can start it. And I'll just chuck the plug back in while I lower it. Transmission is in the park position. Once the engine is running, we will recheck the oil level and top up the oil. It'll generally take 1.5 to 2 litres extra on top of what we filled before. Now we're at the correct level. With the foot on the brake, we'll run through the gears just slowly, down to drive, and then back up to park. Now that you've finished the job, road test the vehicle, come back, recheck the oil level. If you need to top it up, top it up. Oil should be at the top of the dipstick. That's it. Thanks for watching.